In Japan, cemeteries are sacred thresholds between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. For centuries, Japanese culture has maintained profound reverence for ancestors, believing that departed spirits continue to influence their descendants' lives. This spiritual connection is strongest in ancient cemeteries, where generations rest beneath weathered stones and elaborate monuments. Among Tokyo's burial grounds, few carry as heavy a supernatural reputation as Zoshigaya Cemetery. Established in 1874, this sprawling necropolis has become infamous for ghostly encounters. Locals speak in hushed tones of yūrei, restless spirits in white burial kimono wandering the pathways after midnight. Others report hitodama, floating balls of ethereal light that folklore identifies as visible souls of the dead. The warnings are universal. Never enter a Japanese cemetery alone after dark. The boundary between worlds grows thin when the sun disappears, and those who ignore this ancient wisdom often encounter far more than they bargained for. The spirits of the forgotten dead hunger for acknowledgement, simple recognition that they once lived, loved, and mattered. This is one such encounter, a reminder that some cultural taboos exist for very good reasons. Chapter 1. Sarah Martinez had always prided herself on being practical. As a travel blogger documenting Tokyo's hidden corners, she'd explored abandoned buildings and supposedly haunted ryokan. Superstitions were remnants of older times that made good content but held no real power over the modern world. That confidence wavered as she stood before Zoshigaya Cemetery's wrought iron gates at 10:30 on a moonless October night. The cemetery stretched like a city of the dead, pathways disappearing between weathered monuments and Buddhist statuary. Ancient crypts rose like broken teeth, surfaces blackened by decades of pollution and rain. In the distance, a temple bell tolled once, its resonance hanging in still air before fading to silence. Sarah pulled her jacket against the sudden chill. The temperature had dropped 10 degrees since she'd left Majiro Station. Her plan was simple: cut through the cemetery to reach her hotel, saving a 20-minute detour. The gates were always unlocked. She'd confirmed this during daytime reconnaissance. But daylight had made the cemetery feel merely old and melancholy. Now, in night's depths, it pulsed with something far more unsettling. Yoru no bochi ni heruna. Her elderly host Tanaka-san's words echoed in memory. Don't enter the cemetery at night. He'd been preparing tea when she'd mentioned her shortcut, his hand stilling on the ceramic pot, weathered face growing pale. The spirits of Zoshigaya are not at rest, he'd said urgently. Many who enter after dark report encounters. The yūrei wander when the moon is hidden, searching for what was taken in life. Sometimes they mistake the living for those they seek. Sarah had filed it away as folklore, but now, standing before the cemetery's yawning entrance, she felt primal unease. Wind rustled through ancient ginkgo trees lining the borders. Their yellow autumn leaves looked like tiny hands waving goodbye, making whisper sounds like thousands of voices speaking in languages beyond comprehension. Sarah checked her phone. 10:34 p.m. The hotel expected her, and she'd already paid. Walking around the perimeter would take 40 minutes. She was exhausted from a full day of interviews. The direct path would cut that time in half. She pushed open the gate, which creaked like an announcement to whatever listened in darkness. Her footsteps on gravel were unnaturally loud, echoing off surrounding stone monuments. The smell hit her first. Beneath expected earth and stone scents was something else. Cloying incense sweetness mixed with flowers left too long in stagnant water. It strengthened as she moved deeper, following the main path between elaborate tombs and simple markers. 20 meters in, temperature dropped again. Her breath began misting impossible after the warm autumn evening. The cemetery existed in its own microclimate, a pocket of perpetual winter where living warmth couldn't penetrate. Her phone's flashlight cut narrow beams through darkness, illuminating carved stone patches and shadows. Most graves bore Buddhist imagery, lotus flowers, stupas, serene bodhisattva faces. Others were older, surfaces worn smooth until inscriptions became illegible. These ancient markers seemed to lean toward the path, trying to read the intentions of anyone foolish enough to walk among them after dark. Halfway to her destination, Sarah paused. She'd heard something fabric brushing stone. Turning, she swept her flashlight in wide arcs but saw only empty pathways and silent graves. When she turned back, she noticed something that chilled her blood. Her footprints in damp earth showed clearly in the flashlight beam, but beside them, barely visible in soft soil, were impressions of bare feet. They paralleled her path exactly, as if someone had walked alongside her in darkness. someone or something she had never seen. Chapter 2. Sarah's hand trembled as she aimed the flashlight downward. The bare footprints were unmistakable, smaller than her own, with distinct toe impressions in damp earth. They appeared to have materialized from nowhere, simply beginning where her track started and continuing parallel to her path. A sound made her freeze, soft whispers of bare feet on gravel behind her. Sarah spun around, flashlight cutting through darkness. Nothing. The path stretched empty between towering monuments, carved faces, seeming to watch with stone eyes. But the sound hadn't been imagination, gentle footsteps keeping pace with her own. "Hello?" she called, immediately feeling foolish. Her voice was absorbed by surrounding darkness, falling flat in still air. "Is someone there?" Only distant leaf rustles and moisture dripping from temple eaves answered. Sarah forced herself forward. She was being ridiculous, letting local superstitions infiltrate her head. She was a seasoned traveler who'd explored far more dangerous places than a historic cemetery in one of the world's safest cities. But she couldn't shake the feeling she was no longer alone. The path curved left, following hillside contours. Ancient cherry trees formed overhead canopies, branches intertwined like arthritic fingers. In spring, this would be beautiful, carpeted with fallen petals. Now, in autumn's depths, it felt like walking through bone tunnels. That's when she saw the first light. It appeared peripherally soft, blue-white glow hovering 3 feet off the ground between elaborate family tombs. At first, she thought it might be flashlight reflection off polished marble, but when she looked directly, the light remained steady and independent, a hitodama spirit flame. The word came unbidden from her folklore research. According to tradition, hitodama were visible souls of the dead, appearing as floating ethereal lights drifting through cemeteries and sacred places, searching for peace or something lost in life. Sarah watched fascinated as the light pulsed gently, growing brighter and dimmer in breathing rhythms. It was beautiful, ethereal, and otherworldly, but more lights began appearing. First one, then 3, then dozens. They emerged from behind gravestones and memorial sculptures floating at various heights. Some were the same blue-white as the first, others glowed pale green or silver. They moved slowly, aimlessly, like jellyfish drifting through underwater forests. Sarah fumbled for her camera, thinking of incredible footage this would make, but when she raised the device, the screen showed only darkness. Even with night vision engaged, the lights didn't appear. Her flashlight illuminated the cemetery normally, but spirit flames remained invisible to electronic eyes. She lowered the device, and lights immediately returned to natural vision. They seemed closer now, moving with more purpose. Several drifted toward her position, hovering beyond flashlight reach. Her wonder turned to unease as she noticed behavioral changes. They'd stopped random drifting and were moving coordinatedly, forming loose circles around her position. Temperature continued dropping, breath coming in thick vapor puffs. One light, the original blue-white orb, floated directly toward her. As it approached, Sarah saw it wasn't simply light. There was structure within, suggestion of form becoming clearer as it drew near. A face, a woman's face, pale and translucent, with long black hair flowing in unfelt breezes. The features were distinctly Japanese, beautiful but marked by profound sorrow. The spirit's mouth moved, but no sound reached Sarah's ears. Then she heard it. A voice like wind through dry leaves, speaking accented English. "Why do you walk here? Why do you disturb our rest?" Words seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off stone monuments and filtering through bare branches. Sarah's rational mind insisted it was wind or imagination shaped by fear, but the voice came again, clearer and impossible to dismiss. "This place is not for the living after dark. Leave now, before you see what cannot be unseen." Sarah's legs felt like water. The spirit lights continued circling, and in each one, she could now make out human form suggestions, faces young and old, all marked by the same restless sorrow expression. The woman's spirit drifted closer until Sarah could see the elaborate kimono she wore, decorated with falling cherry blossom patterns. Her hair was arranged traditionally, speaking of eras long past, but her eyes held Sarah captive, dark, infinite, filled with pain transcending death itself. "You should not have come here," the spirit whispered, voice now as clear as if she stood beside Sarah in flesh and blood. "But since you have, you must help us. We have been waiting so long. So very long." Chapter 3. The spirit's request pressed against Sarah's chest like a physical presence, making breathing difficult. Around her, Floating lights continued their orbit, each clearly revealing faces of the long dead. Men in formal Meiji-era clothing, women in elaborate kimono, children whose innocent features bore universal departed sadness. What do you want from me?" Sarah whispered, surprised by her voice's steadiness. The cherry blossom kimono woman drifted closer, her form becoming more solid. Sarah could now see intricate embroidery, delicate hairpins, even pale powder applied to her face in life. "Our names," the spirit replied, voice carrying centuries' weight. "They have forgotten our names. Stones crumble, records are lost, families move away or die out. Without names, we cannot rest. We are becoming nothing." Sarah looked around with new understanding. Many older graves were indeed worn beyond recognition, inscriptions erased by time and weather. In a culture where honoring ancestors was paramount, being forgotten was perhaps the ultimate tragedy. "But I can't read old characters," Sarah said. "I don't speak Japanese well enough to dot. You will understand. We will show you." The cemetery began changing around Sarah. Modern street lighting dimmed and disappeared. Distant traffic sounds faded until only leaf rustles and wind whispers remained. Even the city's ever-present horizon glow vanished, leaving her in complete darkness where her flashlight seemed ineffective. But she could still see the spirits, and they were multiplying. Dozens became hundreds. The cemetery filled with glowing forms, each distinct and individual. They emerged from graves and crypts, from beneath ancient trees and behind weathered monuments. Some appeared as they had in life, elderly grandparents, young mothers, children who'd never reached adulthood. Others showed death's marks, samurai with terrible wounds, plague victims with suffering-marked faces, those who died by their own hand, bearing sorrows that had driven them to desperation. And they were all looking at her. The cherry blossom woman raised her translucent hand, and suddenly Sarah could hear them all. Hundreds of voices in overlapping whispers, each calling out names. Yamamoto Kenji, Sato Hanako, Watanabe Ichiro. Names washed over Sarah like tides, each carrying memory flashes, lives lived, families cherished, dreams pursued and lost. She saw glimpses of their stories, young soldiers leaving for wars they wouldn't survive, mothers dying in childbirth, elderly men breathing last breaths surrounded by children who would eventually forget even their faces. "I understand," Sarah gasped, tears streaming. "You want to be remembered. But I can't. I'm just one person. I can't remember all of you." The spirits pressed closer, forms becoming more solid. Sarah felt chill radiating from their presence, smelled grave earthiness and lingering incense traces. Some reached toward her with ghostly hands, and where fingers brushed her skin, she felt cold so intense it burned. "One will do," the woman said, voice now inside Sarah's head. "Remember one of us, truly remember, and we will have hope that others might follow. Choose." Sarah looked around at assembled spirits, each face pleading, each story begging to be told. How could she choose just one? Their collective needs weight pressed down like physical force. That's when she noticed something freezing her blood. Standing at the crowd's edge, barely visible in ethereal light cast by others, was a figure she recognized. Her own face stared back, but not as now. This was herself in death. Skin pale and marked by whatever fate awaited, eyes carrying the same infinite sadness as other spirits. "Choose quickly," the cherry blossom woman urged, voice growing insistent. "The longer you remain, the more you become like us. The barrier between worlds grows thin after midnight, and you have already been marked by our touch." Sarah looked at her hands and saw where spirits had brushed against her. Her skin had taken on pale, translucent quality. Cold was spreading up her arms, and she could feel life force being slowly drawn away by the forgotten dead's hunger. Panic gave her strength. She forced herself to focus on the spirit woman before her, memorizing every detail. "You," Sarah said firmly. "I choose you. Tell me your name, your story, and I swear I'll remember. I'll write about you. Make sure others know." The woman's face transformed with joy so pure it was heartbreaking. "Matsui Yukiko. I died in 1923, in the Great Earthquake. I was to be married the following spring, but the earth shook and fires came. I have waited here 100 years for someone to speak my name again, to know that I once lived and loved and dreamed." Sarah repeated the name, feeling its weight and importance. Matsui Yukiko, I won't forget. The spirits began fading, forms becoming translucent once more. Cemetery's normal sounds returned, distant traffic, hum, wind through urban trees. But cold in Sarah's arms remained, and she could still see pale marks where spirits had touched her. You are bound to us now, Yukiko said as her form dissolved. Part of you will always remain here, in this place between worlds. But you have given us hope, and for that, we are grateful. As the last spirits faded, Sarah found herself alone on the cemetery path. But she was no longer the same person who'd entered those gates. She carried Matsui Yukiko's story within her now, and knowledge that hundreds more waited in darkness for someone brave or foolish enough to listen to their whispered pleas. Chapter 4. Sarah ran. Her footsteps echoed like gunshots, each gravel impact sending sharp reports bouncing off silent monuments. Behind her, she heard other footsteps, dozens keeping perfect pace. The sound was wrong, too light, like bare feet whispers on stone rather than solid living impact. The exit couldn't be far. She'd walked only 20 minutes before encounters began. But in panic, paths seemed to stretch endlessly, winding between increasingly unfamiliar monuments. Had she taken a wrong turn? In darkness, every pathway looked the same, bordered by weathered stones, ancient trees, shadows moving independently of earthly light. Sarah's flashlight beam danced wildly, illuminating carved name fragments that blurred in her panic. Some inscriptions seemed newer than they should be, bearing this decade's dates, this year's. Some bore her own name. She stumbled over uneven stone, catching herself against a moss-covered monument. The stone was warm body temperature, seeming to pulse like a living heart. She jerked away and kept running. The footsteps behind were getting closer. Sarah. Her name drifted through air, spoken by dozens of voices in perfect unison, coming from all directions ahead, behind, from the very ground beneath her feet. Sarah Martinez. They knew her full name now. In those moments when spirits had touched her, they'd learned everything about her, past, present, and perhaps most terrifyingly, her future. She could see light ahead, warm street lamp glow beyond cemetery boundaries. The exit had to be beyond that stand of ancient cherry trees. Freedom was 50 meters away. But approaching the tree line, Sarah realized something was wrong. Light wasn't coming from beyond the cemetery. It emanated from the trees themselves, the same ethereal glow she'd seen in spirit flames. Cherry trees were blooming out of season, branches heavy with pale blossoms glowing with inner light. Hanging from those branches, swaying in unfelt breezes, were dozens of paper lanterns. Each bore names in flowing Japanese characters, and as Sarah watched in horror, more names appeared on blank lanterns, including her own. You cannot leave, came Yukiko's voice from the glowing branches. You are one of us now. You have seen this place's true nature, and knowledge has changed you. Look at your hands. Sarah raised her hands to the lantern's ethereal light. Pale marks where spirits had touched her had spread, traveling up her arms like frost on glass. Her skin was becoming translucent, and beneath it, she could see not blood and bone, but the same soft light emanating from spirit flames. No, she whispered, then shouted, No, I'm alive. She forced herself forward, pushing through ghostly cherry blossoms. Petals felt real against her face, soft, cool, carrying scents of spring that had died 100 years ago. But beyond them, instead of expected street, she found only more cemetery. Pathways stretched in all directions, identical and infinite. Every monument seemed familiar now, as if she'd walked among them for years rather than hours. Some bore her own face carved in stone, her own birth and death dates. The death date was tonight. Sarah's rational mind snapped. She screamed raw, primal sound echoing through cemetery, seeming to animate every shadow. The sound returned, transformed, harmonizing until it became a choir of the damned. She collapsed on the gravel path, sobbing. Cold had reached her chest now, each breath emerging as visible vapor, lingering like departing souls. Do not despair, Yukiko's voice whispered close to her ear. The spirit materialized beside her, kneeling with inhuman grace. Death is not the end, it is transformation. You will join us, and your story will be added to ours. In time, others will come, and perhaps one will choose to remember you as you remembered me. I don't want to die, Sarah sobbed. I have a life, family, people who love me. As did we all. But those connections do not end with death, they simply change form. Your family will remember you, and their memory will sustain part of who you are. Here, among us, you will help others find peace that comes with being remembered. Sarah felt the last warmth leaving her body. The transformation was accelerating. She could see through her hands now, felt her connection to the physical world growing thin as silk thread. But in that surrender moment, she found unexpected strength. If she was going to die in this place, she would not die in despair. She would die as herself, with dignity intact. "If I become like you," she said, voice growing fainter but more determined, "will you help me remember? Will you help me write?" Yukiko smiled, the first pure joy expression Sarah had seen from any spirit. "Yes, your words will be our words. Your voice will be our voice. Through you, we will reach the living world and plant memory seeds." Sarah felt herself fading, consciousness spreading like mist. But instead of darkness, she found herself surrounded by stories, thousands of them, accumulated memories of everyone ever forgotten in this place. Their joys, sorrows, hopes and fears became hers, and hers became theirs. She was no longer Sarah Martinez, travel blogger. She was something larger, containing multitudes. When the groundskeeper found cemetery gates open the next morning, he noticed nothing unusual. Pathways were clear, monuments undisturbed, but he did find a small notebook on the main path, pages filled with names and stories in both English and Japanese. He started to throw it away, but something made him pause. The writing was beautiful, stories compelling, tales of lives lived and lost, dreams deferred and love remembered. He took the notebook home, and that evening found himself reading stories aloud to his elderly father. The old man listened with growing excitement. "That name, Matsui Yukiko, that was my grandmother's cousin. She died in the great earthquake just before her wedding. No one has spoken of her in decades." And so the stories spread, as Sarah had somehow known they would. The notebook was copied, shared, translated. Each story found its way to descendants who'd forgotten ancestors, to historians collecting old Tokyo tales, to those understanding that remembering the dead was sacred duty. In the cemetery, when the moon is dark and the hour late, visitors sometimes report seeing a young foreign woman walking paths with purpose and peace. She carries a notebook and writes constantly, recording stories whispered by grateful spirits. They say she is no longer entirely alive, but not quite dead either. She exists in space between worlds, a bridge connecting living and dead through the simple, sacred act of remembering. And on certain nights, when wind is right and darkness complete, you can hear her voice calling out names in darkness, names that would otherwise be lost forever, names carrying the essence of lives once lived and loved. The cemetery of Zoshigaya has kept its secrets for centuries, but now, thanks to one traveler who chose compassion over fear, those secrets have begun finding their way back to light. After all, the dead only truly die when they are forgotten. And Sarah Martinez, in becoming something between life and death, has ensured that forgetting will be just a little bit harder in a world that moves too fast to remember its ghosts.